By historically reliable, we mean that the author, be it Suetonius or Plutarch or Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, or whoever, they are giving us an essentially faithful representation of what occurred.
What is like a good methodology to some of this stuff? Like what do we need to understand first as the Gospels as books of history, because they have a certain genre to them, right, Mike?
That's correct. They just have so much in common with the genre of ancient biography. And even those who don't go as far as saying they're ancient biographies, they are willing to say that they share a whole lot in common with the genre of ancient biography. Now, ancient biography differs from ancient novel, okay? Even though they can somewhat sound differently, it's still a different genre. The Gospels are not ancient novels. By far, most scholars would say they're not, and only those who are out there writing on the fringe of New Testament scholarship would claim that they're novels. They're not, because ancient novels, as Craig Keener has shown, ancient novels were typically romances in which two lovers had to overcome obstacles. That is not the Gospels, of course. Ancient novels almost always involved exclusively fictitious characters who had allegedly lived in the distant past. On a rare occasion, they would involve a historical character, but there isn't a single example of an ancient historical novel in which a historical character had lived within even as recently as a century of the time of writing. So when you come to the Gospels, it's filled with ancient historical people like Herod the Great, Caesar Augustus, Tiberius Caesar, Herod's sons, Archelaus, Antipas. You've got Pontius Pilate. You've got Caiaphas, the high priest. You've got John the Baptist and Jesus, James, the brother of Jesus. All of these are known to be historical characters, and all of them had lived within just a few decades, or certainly within a century of the time of the writing of all four Gospels. So they're not ancient novels. They are ancient biographies. Now, that doesn't mean that everything in them is true. Ancient biographies could blend in some legend and myth involved. That's not to say those are in the Gospels, but the genre of ancient biography could include some of that, and there's a lot of liberties that could be involved. The Life of Apollonius of Tyana by Philostratus, who wrote in the third century, early third century. Or wait a minute. The very early third century. That includes what's probably a number of legendary elements in it. So again, just because it's ancient biography doesn't mean that everything in it is true. But it is the proper genre if you are going to include historical accounts about a figure. So that's a starting point. Then you look at some other things. So here's some things, and I've included this in an article I had published in Religions several years ago, and they can access that online at Religions, or they can just go to my website, risenjesus.com, and access it there under blogs. And I had that article published there. Basically, I show different criteria. I present, I believe it's 4 different criteria for assessing something as being historically reliable. Criteria that aren't biased toward the Gospels, but they don't privilege the Gospels. They're ones, common sense criteria that would apply across the board to any bit of ancient historical literature. So it'd be like, number 1, do we have good reasons to think that the authors chose their sources judiciously? And in that article, I compare it, I apply this to Suetonius' life of Caesar Augustus. Suetonius is believed to write closer to the way modern biographers write than any other ancient biographer. And his finest biography is believed to have been his life of Augustus. So I take that one and say, all right, let's apply this to Suetonius's life of Augustus. And yeah, we have good reason to think that he chose his sources judiciously. Secondly, do we have reason to think that he used his sources responsibly? And I give reasons why we do have reasons to think that he used his sources responsibly. And by the way, he did choose the sources judiciously, but not all the time. Sometimes he was indiscriminate in his choice and use of sources, which is a negative trait of Suetonius here. Third, do we have good reasons to think that a number or even most of the things that Suetonius reports in that life of Augustus is true? Can they be verified? And fourth, we don't want any more than a very small percentage of things reported to be reasonable candidates for being errors. And so when you look at this, Suetonius' life of Augustus passes. Then I compare it with the Gospel of Mark, and I show that Mark is every bit as good as Suetonius' life of Augustus in fulfilling those criteria, if not a little bit better. So I think we have good reason to think that at least Mark, and we could go from what I've just said here, that Mark is a historically reliable account of Jesus. Now, again, that does not mean that everything Mark reports about Jesus is true. What I would contend is by historically reliable, we mean that the author, be it Suetonius or Plutarch or Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, or whoever, they are giving us an essentially faithful representation of what occurred. That's how I would define historically reliable. Now, it could be more than that, but it's nothing less than that. So I'm not just saying that what we have about Jesus is only an essentially faithful representation and nothing more, or a good gist of what occurred. I'm saying at minimum, we have that with the Gospel of Mark.
Very good. And I think it is key to defending the gospel truth and the history behind the gospels it's we're making modest claims here. I mean, if you look at the evidence of most historical events, we have a mountain of evidence for everything that Jesus claimed who he was, and for who Jesus claimed to be, and what the apostles believed him to be, and his story that confirmed it as well.